So like Jim said, I'm from ThoughtWorks. I've been at ThoughtWorks for a little over a year now, and an experience design software consultant. We have over 25 offices in 11 countries across the world. I'm based out of the Chicago office. Like I said, I've been at ThoughtWorks for a little over a year, and I've had the opportunity to travel, really experience some cool stuff, and implement Agile design across the country with many different clients. So I kind of want to just talk about what Agile design means to us at ThoughtWorks and some of the experiences I've had along the way. So let's start. Before I get into Agile design, I kind of want to talk about where it began. Cool. So, in the beginning, we had waterfall. So as we all know, waterfall development starts at the top with the requirements, moving on to design, implementation, verification, and then maintenance. Waterfall, started in manufacturing industries with environments that were incredibly physical and demanding, places where late changes really were a game changer and almost were impossible to implement. And so the idea of waterfall was incredibly important for hardware and the manufacturing industries. So it was a great method for them, and it worked for us initially, but it definitely had problems. So often we find out too late what our customers actually wanted. But regardless, we learned important lessons along the way. We learned to listen, learn, design, and make. And these 4 steps, early and often, help us frame the right problem and address our users' needs. In fact, these steps can be done in any order. So, we might be designing and sketching, and then making a prototype, going out and observing with customers and listening to their needs. Or we might be listening first, interviewing people, then coming up with designs, building a prototype, and learning through observation with our users. And this makes us happy, and it makes our customers happy. It provides a lot of room for feedback and change, and gives us the ability for progressive improvement along the way. Eventually, we call this Agile design. So what is actually Agile design? Traditionally, user feedback is late in the process. We begin with the concept with your team and your stakeholders, and move into envisioning, gather information that the business has, gather any research you may have done internally, then set up the environment in iteration 0, start building, and then eventually we may introduce user feedback. But Agile design engages users early and often the entire time, from the beginning to the end. So you start with a concept, and you start interviewing your users, your customers, move on to envisioning, and with that feedback, you get to know who your customers are more, start designing prototypes, going out and testing, really validating the problem that you've decided to solve. And you do it continually, all the way until you actually release the product. So how does this happen? Experienced designers at ThoughtWorks use these 4 different methods to implement Agile design with our clients. And we use them early and often. So I'm going to go through each one and kind of talk about how we do things at ThoughtWorks, and then talk about my particular experience with some of these methods. So this is the first one, which is rapid prototyping. Yeah, seriously. Rapid prototyping is a quick prototype of key journeys through an application. It really helps to prove the usability of the core functionality of the application. In this picture here, for our rapid prototyping session, this is from a client that I was on last year. You have, it's a little bit dark, but you have 2 developers on one side of the table and an experienced designer on the other side. And together they're building rapid prototypes to go out and test with users. Something that's interesting at ThoughtWorks is rapid prototyping is fantastic, but it can really be helpful when you start integrating different people on the team in order to prototype and go out and test. It gives early feedback from our usability testing sessions. So this is an image from a client that I worked with in Singapore, and together the entire team is broken up into different groups where they are doing rapid prototyping sessions. We have a group in the back with the CEO, some developers, a tester, a group to the right that has some thought workers, product owners, developers. Prior to this meeting, they had set up their objectives for the year and talked together about what they wanted to, the goals that they wanted to reach. And during this prototyping session, they had a time-boxed amount to prototype together and start sketching out ideas. So at the end of the session, each group delivered one prototype with all their ideas in them. When you do integrate different aspects of the team, different members of the team, product owners and in this case, C-level people, and we've got our QAs who actually, in this particular client, were on the same project but worked in a building far away from this building. You start to see different perspectives in your prototyping. You start to gather ideas together. It really you start to see the motives that everyone has as respective members in the team, and it helps build a holistic prototype together. So this is the results from those prototyping sessions. I believe the business requirements were something like the home page needs to have a location. We need a call to action for, this was a property client, renting and buying. And what's interesting is each group came up with a map. Most of them together had this idea of a map on the homepage. And then there's also the idea for the call to actions for sale and rent here. You see a lot of them in the left-hand corner. So together, we got up and each group talked about what it is that they sketched, and we came to some conclusions that we were all on the same page about, which is really exciting. And also learned that there are some things that people interpreted differently and wanted to see in a different way. They wanted to solve a problem in a different way. And those were areas that we continue to prototype around. So with Sketch to Code, it really helps to bring the high-level features down to smaller chunks. It's easy to get lost in your work, and as a developer, when you're busy working on all these different aspects of an application, sometimes you lose focus on that small little chunk. Okay, so this is an image here. I didn't even realize I was in this slide, but I am. So I am an experience designer on this project. I focused on research in this particular project. There's also an experience designer to the left of me. He's more on the front-end code side of things, the interaction designer. Then we also have two developers. This particular picture is from a sketch to code session we had with the development team that we were working with. I had gone out and done some research with the UX research team and came back with some results. And the developer and the interaction designer were pairing to take the results from the research, sketch them together, and then code them into the application. They weren't hard coding into the build. They were kind of writing some front-end code so that we could take the prototype out to the market and test. But this type of process, the sketch-to-code process, really helps to connect to the story that you're focusing on. The business will set requirements, and those requirements shouldn't be as explicit as, we need a specific type of widget or a specific type of design. Once those requirements are set, it gives a chance for development design to focus on those requirements and come up with the best solution possible. And we do this through pairing. So that picture before, we were pairing, and this picture here, we're pairing. There's an interaction designer on the right, and the developer on the left. I think as an experience designer, I've come across a lot of situations where you might visually design something, and sometimes you don't have the opportunity to sit down with development and talk with them. Maybe it becomes communicated as a visual artifact, or it becomes some type of requirement that is in some piece of documentation somewhere, but it gets lost in translation. And from my experience, I can't tell you how many times I've lost time just trying to communicate properly with the developer, and the developer communicating with me about constraints that maybe just won't make that design come to life the way that I expected to. Pairing helps solve that problem. So here we're doing the sketch to code session, but we have a design in mind, and Chris, the experience designer, is sketching this design. Rebecca, the developer, takes that design and then starts coding the front end code. And Chris sits and pairs with her. As an interaction designer, he's very familiar with the code that she's writing, and together they come up with the best solution based on the visual design that they created together or that he created himself. So pairing early and often is also very helpful. And then this is kind of the last aspect of Agile design that we find really helpful, which is we call retrospectives in our prime directive. If anyone's ever worked with ThoughtWorks before, we try to make sure we say this quote during every retrospective. I'm not going to sit here and read it to you guys, you can read it, but retrospectives do a couple of things. They're usually held after a showcase, and a showcase may be just the time that you sit and show your product to the stakeholders and to the team. And after that showcase is finished, then you get into a retrospective, which during that time, you talk about the work completed since the last iteration. It really helps to talk about how things went, if they went well or didn't go well. And that may be, we had blockers, a lot of bugs this week, a lot of problems, or things went really well. The environment was great, the build never failed. Let's keep it up. We're doing something right. Let's identify it and continue doing that. It's also time to outline personal and team issues. This is something that I think might get overlooked sometimes. Everyone has stresses at work and there's tension, whether it's you or someone else or the team or the situation. But this is really an opportunity to sit together and talk about it. You may not solve the problem there, but it can be really important to highlight it for the rest of the team to be aware of. And then the last thing that happens in a retrospective, which is really important, is action items. So developing a plan for the next week. And that plan may be things we want to continue doing, or maybe problems we've had. This is how we're going to solve them. And let's actually assign these problems and ways to solve them to people, so that when we have a retrospective next week, we can go back and identify what those issues were, if they've been fixed, or if we've continued doing the right things. Okay, so these are techniques I want to talk about 10 techniques we use in Agile design that I think really, these techniques help to overcome some of the pains that you may feel in, I hate to say traditional Agile development, but maybe the basic Agile development that we're all familiar with, as well as waterfall. These are just kind of little tidbits that we've implemented in Agile design to help fix some of those pains. The first one, ramp up your dev team when you have a concept agreed and tested. It's really important that you, as a team, and the stakeholders are all on the same page about the idea that you're going to implement and the concept that you're going to implement. Ideally, it'd be great that you can get out there and test that concept and make sure that it's valid in the market, it's valid with your users. Then that you're solving the right problem and you're solving it with the right solution. And once you have that identified, then go ramp up your dev team, set up the environment, get it all going, put all the money into the computers and the operating systems that you need, anything that you need, but make sure that that concept is agreed upon and tested first. 2, if you design for everyone, then you design for no one. I think it's probably something familiar for a lot of designers here. I think we're all told this a lot, but I found from experience it's easy to forget this along the way. So initially you may identify personas, set up your target audience, identifying your target audiences, and really focus on the users initially when you're deciding on the concept. But make sure you don't forget them, because along the way, it's easy to kind of lose track and maybe be swayed by the marketing team or the product team. Once you've built a part of the application that's beautiful, it's amazing, it's great, and marketing gets a hold of it and says, oh my God, I want to know more about this, I want to market this to specific people. Suddenly you might be opening up yourself to a different set of users that you never considered. And that's probably going to add scope to the project. And then you may start traveling down paths where you're designing for a lot of different people that you never thought about initially. You want to try to avoid that because, again, if you start doing that, you end up designing for no one. People design better together. This is something we do truly believe in at ThoughtWorks. It's something I personally believe in too. I think it can be kind of tough from a traditional design perspective. Because I think as designers, we're taught to kind of silo ourselves and work together to build something that's perfect, work on your own to build something that's perfect, and take a lot of time to do it. But in software development, we're delivering a product that the entire team works together to build. So design shouldn't be any different. We should all be designing together to deliver this, to design the product and then deliver it. And that doesn't just go for user experience designers. In this picture we have, I believe, the client who's the product owner, as well as a developer helping to design the product. If you find yourself siloed, it's not a good idea. Make sure you're always pairing with someone. Okay, number 4. Successful solutions live here. I think this is something that we all think about when we kick off a project initially and start building an application. You got to find the sweet spot in between these 3 pieces. If customers are interested in buying it, if it's viable, and if it's feasible. But it can be tough to remember this along the way because the market changes really fast and the business changes. I can't tell you, I've been through a handful of companies that have had reorganizations while we're in place building an application, and suddenly our budget's changed, our people have changed, our target has changed, and you got to make sure you stay in between these 3 spots to deliver what you're looking for to the right people. Keep it visual. So I kind of come from a design background initially and then moved into software, and I always felt that I'm a visual person, designers are visual people. I generalize that maybe developers are not, maybe other people are not. But I didn't embrace it too much. I continued to build design artifacts to share with people that I thought may not have appreciated it. But I found that it's incredibly helpful as a communication tool. If you go into a room that has a bunch of posters with maybe some type of technical architecture and a mapping system laid out, that's probably going to generate more conversation than a bunch of spec docs thrown all over a table. No one's going to sit and read those things. And although that map might not have as many details as those docs may have, it'll start a conversation and it'll bring the right people into it. I have a funny story that I want to share about visual artifacts. I was on a client last year in Boston, and the ThoughtWorks team I was with had just landed on site, and we were so excited. We were working for a startup, and we were thrilled to be working with these guys. So we, go right over to the client site, don't even check into the hotel. We get there, the client's there, we're all thrilled. And instead of making introductions, we start rambling on about different things we can do. We're just really excited to be there and build this application together. It was a pretty big team. We had a good set of developers, good set of designers. We had a big QA team. And so we started throwing ideas around left and right. And we were saying, we got to get this down, we got to write it down, we're going to forget what we're talking about. But we weren't prepared because we had come just from the airport. No one went and bought supplies. No one was ready. And the client, who was also becoming very excited after this conversation, had said, well, we have whiteboard pens, but we don't have whiteboard markers, so let's write on the windows. So we go to the windows, and these are glass windows, big, big glass windows, floor to ceiling, that face a road that I'm unfamiliar with because I just had never been in Boston, that area of Boston before. And we have development on one side, sketching architecture for the way that the content management system is going to work. We have design on the other side, sketching all these different ideas, product people jumping from left to right. Everyone was just so excited about it. And we left at the end of the day, all went back to our hotels and went to bed. And the next morning we came in, and the office manager downstairs had said, you guys can't do that to the windows. And we were like, oh, sorry, we'll erase it. She said, yeah, we had the CEO and the CFO worked in that building, and they had come in that morning and drove down 95 and saw mappings all over the windows of their building and said, we can't have this on our building, you can't do this. So we learned quickly that we should really be prepared and make sure that we have the appropriate supplies and not get too overzealous with being excited to build an application. Okay. So this is really the idea that whatever we're doing is building up, we're never going down. It can be tough sometimes when you're building an application and you suddenly have a bunch of bugs, or the build fails regularly and no one can test in the environment. But all of that is just adding to a product that's being built up in value. You may spend an entire iteration not actually releasing, not actually having anything to showcase, because you spend that time fixing bugs maybe. But we're not going backwards when we do that. We're just adding value. So we're going up. Okay, number 4. Stay ahead, but not too far ahead. The developers are chomping at our heels again. This is sort of one for design. This can be kind of tough, but it's really important that as you're building an application, you make sure that you're close enough to it. Someone could just grab you for a desk check. A developer has completed a story and they want you to take a look at it. It shouldn't take you a long time to read through that story or any of the requirements for it to know what's happening. You should be close enough that you recognize what's going into the build that week, but far enough away that you can still sort of see the whole picture of the application. Otherwise, you end up with some, Frankenstein application because no one thought holistically about what would happen. It's a really tough sweet spot that you want to maintain, but it's important to think about. Focus on the minimum viable prototype. So, the minimum viable prototype, or the MVP, is something that you have defined together as a team with the stakeholders from day one, and it's something that you've all agreed to. So you don't want to stray too far away from it. Like I said earlier, it's easy to be swayed by marketing or the product team. I can't tell you. I really love product people, and I tend to love new ideas, and it's easy to get stolen away from what's currently going on and start going down a new avenue. But you need to make sure you focus on that set of stories and that scope that you defined initially in order to build the application that you're expecting. The software is a deliverable. This is also something that's incredibly important, and I think probably everyone has experienced maybe going a little bit too far with prototyping. Prototyping is a tool used to help support the software that's being delivered at the end of the project. So no matter what you're doing in design, you want to make sure that if it's being built in a prototype that might possibly be thrown away, you don't put too much effort into that prototype, and that you can make sure you can reuse certain elements from it, a style guide or specific widgets that are going to be implemented in the app. But at the end of the day, it's the software that you're delivering, not the prototype. The design is never finished. I love this one because as a designer, I am looking for perfection, and I think when people are striving for perfection, they sometimes continually reevaluate what they're doing before they share it. That reevaluation really needs to happen in the iteration with the team. And I think the best way to accept that you may be close to perfection is by iterating on your design together as a whole. Because every single time that you design, you put it through an iteration, you test it, you validate things, you recognize other things completely failed, and you need to take another stab at it, the closer you get to perfection. Okay, so just kind of a summary of what we talked about. A couple points about how this is different from maybe Agile development or definitely waterfall development. The first point here, just enough of a concept test with users to begin development. Although it's really important to engage with users early and often and from the from the get-go with the concept and the envisioning, we don't want to put too much time into that because then we lose time in the actual development of the software. Designers embedded in project teams. This is something that I feel is really important. Every member of a team has a different perspective, and although designers might not be coding, they can really bring really interesting new type of value to a development team. Short iterative cycles of design, test, and build. Again, similar to the first point, but if your cycles are very efficient and effective, and you keep them short, then you're going to be able to test and code quicker and validate your ideas at a faster rate. Cross-functional teams, full-time and co-located. This is kind of an interesting point that really wasn't mentioned earlier, but sometimes you end up having to be co-located or have a cross-functional team for a variety of reasons. But it can be really beneficial if you think about it. It could be a budgetary thing. It could be, partnering with different, vendors or whatever it might be. But if the team is working together and there's clear communication, you have the opportunity to be testing in different environments, testing with different users, and really kind of getting a good, realistic view of how the application will be once it's live. Team collaboration, space and wall. Back to my point of writing on the windows. Don't write on windows. Make sure you have enough space and walls to sketch out ideas. Just enough design, low fidelity. Don't get too invested in a high fidelity prototype during testing. Make sure that it's just enough that you can validate concepts, so you don't waste too much time not building. Just enough research. I tend to be really guilty of this. I love user research, and I find that it can be kind of a tough sell. It can be a controversial thing. Sometimes people don't really see the value of it, but once you do learn how valuable it is, it's easy to go overboard. Again, just like prototyping, it's used to deliver software, so you don't want too much of it. Focus on working software as deliverable, again. That's the main point here. There's all these different methods in design, different aspects or across the project where you can bring a lot of value and validate ideas, but at the end of the day, it's the software that you're delivering. That value is going to the software. And some of the benefits from Agile design is the ability to respond to change. I think every company, everyone wants to be able to respond to change in some way, and Waterfall didn't necessarily afford that for us because we couldn't go backwards. In Agile development, we've got some room for change, but if we're lean and agile and we introduce design early and often, we can afford even more change. Customer-focused culture. I mean, at the end of the day, we're delivering this product for our users and our customers, so we want to make sure that we're focused on them along the way. Avoiding rework of obvious usability issues. This is, something that you find when you don't get out and test. So if you test a lot and you test efficiently, you'll avoid a lot of those usability problems you may be seeing in the application. Implementing a design that is true to concept. You may have a lot of people talking about what it is that they expect in this application, a lot of requirements in front of you. Communication is key to make sure that you're actually designing what it is that everyone has discussed and thought about. If there's no communication, we're not going to build a design where based on the concept that we've all agreed to. And the continuous feedback loop. That's really just feedback between the development team, the design team, product owners, QA, and our users. We go out and we design, we test, we build, we test, and if we, again, do it efficiently and effectively, and we do it a lot, we'll have a continuous feedback loop. And the last point, governance agility, see funding on the MVP. I think this really just brings home the point that in an MVP and in Agile design, we have the ability to change. And we have the ability to focus, we should be focusing on the user, but within reason. We are not making a drastic change on the product once we find out that maybe something, the market's changed. We need to change incrementally and stay within the scope of the MVP. This is a quote that I hear it all the time with ThoughtWorks, just fail early and often in order to succeed sooner. And I think some of the things that I talked about really embrace this idea. Through rapid prototyping, you're failing. You're failing a lot, but you're failing in order to validate that prototype and that idea. Sketch to code. Again, in the same way, you're failing, right? Because you're sketching things that, the first thing that come to mind, sometimes when you spend a lot more time designing, you may think of use cases you didn't consider before. But when you're rapidly sketching ideas with a team, you can shoot down those ideas, and as a group, people can start recognizing those use cases faster. But you're failing again in order to succeed. And then lastly, pairing. Same idea. You may have a design, and you pair with a front-end developer, and the developer recognizes that that's not supported within the language that they're writing in, or it's not supported based on the context. You're failing because that design isn't going to be the way that you think you can implement it, so you've got to change it. Okay, so that's everything in the ThoughtWorks fashion. Feel free to reach out to me and contact me if you have any questions or any feedback about this presentation or anything from today. Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it.